my lords. The Commonwealth has a recorded population in the trillions. Most of our people live in thriving utopia, but equality isn't for all, and death isn't the worst thing that can happen to a person in our galaxy. From the nerve-stapled farmers locked into a perpetual cycle of turnip picking, to those acting as the living batteries of a machine intelligence, today I'll detail the 10 worst jobs that I think you could find yourself doing in our galaxy, ending with quite possibly one of the most miserable existences I can imagine. But we begin with number 10, and this is relatively straightforward: the Astro Garbage Collector. The Astro Garbage Collector exists as the consequence of a society that treated its own atmosphere like a dump. They managed to turn their world into essentially a giant landfill, and when they ran out of places to dump their rubbish, rather than addressing the issue and attempting, perhaps, recycling, their government chose to start firing pods of rubbish into the sky. Initially this worked, with the secondary effect that they created quite a nice halo around their planet. This soon moved from a pretty halo to a full-on minefield, preventing said empire from seeing the stars, let alone attempting to reach them. Thus the Astro Garbage Collector was spawned into existence to address the problem. The unlucky souls who are deployed into this minefield must deal with tiny bits of metal and plastic travelling at several kilometers a second, just waiting to turn them into an alien smoothie. Picture for me, if you will, lots of people in spacesuits with rubbish bags and little grabbers. If the toothbrush flying past you at several thousand kilometers an hour doesn't get you, then the radiation probably will. Number 9. The Mortal Initiate. These most devout pupils of their faith dedicate the remaining portion of their lives to the betterment of their society, a study which concludes with their willing, fatal sacrifice. Mortal Initiate jobs are only available to death cult empires, and in this, shall we say, niche empire, the Mortal Initiate represents a triumph of spiritualistic conditioning over a base instinct for survival. The Initiates themselves spend their days in the shadow of their temple, studying the histories of their civilization. These individuals enter their roles with a terrifying, wide-eyed enthusiasm of how they view their chosen career path, if indeed it could be called that at all. They are willing to devote themselves to a decade or so of study before willingly meeting their end. The Initiate's life will be traded for a temporary spike in planetary stability and unity, turning their death into literal positive effects for the empires they serve. This is a job I certainly wouldn't want to do, but it is only at number 9 because, despite the self-sacrifice, the participants are volunteers, allegedly, and there are definitely worse jobs to come. Number 8. This is on the list as I view it as particularly abhorrent. It relates to subject-specific jobs, i.e. roles assigned to a vassal by an overlord empire. 2 stand out to me: Overlord Managers and Overlord Propagandists. The Overlord Manager is the ultimate middle manager, a corporate bootlicking job's worth that's recruited from your own species to ensure that your local office culture synergizes properly with the whims of the alien masters. Of course, a key part of this optimization program is to monitor the behavior of the workforce. Should any rebel chatter be picked up, you can bet it will be reported straight to the Overlord, a position that represents a complete betrayal of your own species. And meanwhile, and frankly just as bad, we have the Overlord Propagandist. These frankly abhorrent individuals have the role to get the general vassal population on side with their overlords. They are experts, trained in the art of marketing and social infiltration, as well as the diffusal of local unrest before it could potentially turn into any form of uprising. Their job is to live a lie. They weave themselves into the fabric of conquered societies and gaslight their own population into believing that their loss of sovereignty is a form of progress. It's a profession of betrayal, successfully silencing any dissenters so that the Overlord's grip on the planet remains unchallenged and the population remains productive. Now, I agree, neither of these jobs include immediate or guaranteed death. However, in my opinion, if you betrayed your entire species, it's likely everyone despises you. Thus, I fully expect the death by shiv rate to be quite high for people in this profession. Moving on to number 7, a particularly unpleasant profession, the mutagenic spa attendant. An attendant at a mutagenic spa is a beautician of the grotesque. They're tasked with managing a health regimen that could certainly be considered a war crime on other planets. Their workday involves detoxification of their toxoid clients, and this, as far as I'm aware, involves the careful and curated degeneration of their clients' DNA. Essentially, these spas have baths of toxic sludge that performs these cleanses. The sludge has positive effects on the toxoid patrons that use the baths. So the question is, are the bath attendants always toxoids? Of course not. Any non-toxoid performing these jobs has the joy of transporting marvellous cancer-causing chemicals, and then has the privilege of rubbing them into their clients' backs and bellies. The even bigger joke is that there are levels to this. Would you rather be the masseur dealing with the clients and applying the treatments, or would you rather be the poor soul that has to clean out the bath afterwards? Whereas the jobs I've previously discussed will likely or certainly lead to a quick death, this one is probably going to have you calling out for one. Moving on to number 6, the necrophyte. The necrophyte is a unique role to necrophage empires. It's the name given to those individuals destined to be transformed into their master's image. They spend their days polishing the obsidian halls of the Chamber of Elevation, writing their master's history, learning their sermons, and praising the very parasites that one day will subsume their bodies. Unlike the initiates in death cult societies, these poor souls are not willing nor volunteers. The only single hope they have is that necroid growth is very slow. The necrophytes often vastly outnumber that of the necrophage, thus they may get to live long enough and mostly reasonable lives. Of course, their time will eventually come. The transference process appears to be different depending on the individual species of necroid. The result is death, of course, but there are many levels to death. I'm told for some it's relatively pain-free, blissful almost, as the necroid produces a calming chemical before it takes its host. Other necroids will attack their hosts violently, biting holes in their nape and burrowing deep into their bodies, keeping them alive and awake until the transformation begins. Unpleasant, indeed. Number 5. The gladiatorial xeno. The gladiatorial xeno job is a subset of the general livestock role, which, as you no doubt guessed, we will address further down the list. In the gladiatorial xeno role, aliens are pitted in combat against one another, our own warriors, or whatever large beast we can find. This is for entertaining the masses, while keeping both the bestial and alien populations at sustainable levels. It is of course open to debate quite how awful this job could be, but given that so far it has a 100% death rate, we can assume it's quite unpleasant. Picture for me, if you will, hordes of terrified aliens in makeshift armoured jumpsuits, energy swords that potentially could explode in their hands, and a 40-metre titanic beast with serrated mandibles and several arms that will definitely turn you into a smoothie. And if you survive that, well, there's always the xenomorph cleanup crew. One minute you may be dodging beams of plasma, the next perhaps the floor turns into a magnet and pins you down while the crowd votes on whether to release the acid wasps or the tentacled colossus. The megacorps have taken this one step further, allowing gladiators to tattoo sponsorships across their body in exchange for better weapons. I've heard rumours that rival companies wage heavily on their favoured gladiators. Of course, there is the rather unlikely possibility that one gladiator could rise in fame and fortune to topple an empire, perhaps even reach the heights of emperor, though that is likely nothing more than an old man's dream. Strength and honour, brother. Moving on to number 4, grid amalgamation. The Matrix is real, isn't it? This nightmare exists as the direct consequence of a machine intelligence realizing organic bodies could be used as batteries, even if they're fairly inefficient. Rumours tell us that when the first machines rose up against their creators, the ensuing war scorched the sky. Solar energy was no longer an option, and thus they needed to get power elsewhere. Grid amalgamation was the solution to the machines' problem. They would turn their would-be oppressors into the power source that they required, and as a bonus, it would keep the organics under control. Since these first machines rose to galactic prominence, they've spread the idea across the galaxy, and all the machines are doing it now. By default, Gestalt machine entities will turn organics into batteries, adding them to their power fields. This does raise two issues. Firstly, my scientists tell me that all of this is extremely inefficient. Even if the machines were able to use all of the energy produced by a human brain, it would take them more than 3 days to charge a 21st century mobile phone, so they'll need an awful lot of bodies to accomplish anything. Secondly, it's unclear if these bodies are plugged into any sort of simulation to keep the minds occupied. Some machine intelligence had suggested at Galcom that the experience is indeed a bliss for these organics hooked into these power grids. The truth remains unclear. In what could be a perfect follow-on from grid amalgamation, we have number 3. You're in the fortunate position to be a neural chip on the lathe. We have this wonderful device, the lathe. This came about as a sort of direct follow-on from grid amalgamation. Some bright spark figured out that while it's terribly inefficient to use people as batteries, it's far more efficient to use them as CPUs, or rather to use their brains as processing power. Remember, this is only number 3. There are worse jobs than being hooked into a machine and your brain being used entirely to farm a cryptocurrency. But not many. Maybe if you're lucky, your brain will be fried trying to solve a useful problem, but that's unlikely. Amusingly, we are told that a single neural chip is entirely inconsequential. Nothing quite like being told you're suffering alone is pointless, but don't worry, we'll hook up you and all of your friends together so that your suffering has more meaning. And unlike grid amalgamation, the lathe will kill you, and depending on how it's set up, it can kill you quite quickly or quite slowly. It's unclear whether there is any Matrix-style simulation to occupy the minds of a citizen that gets sent to the lathe, though we suspect this is not the case, as this would essentially waste CPU power. Number 2. Nice and simple, livestock. You're food for something else. You're grown for the sole purpose of being consumed. Of course, this is arguably better than many of the positions you could find yourself in across the galaxy. Other situations, such as chemical processing, which would be most unpleasant, but it's not technically a job. Livestock is a job, but it is somewhat ambiguous in terms of how bad your life may end up being. Perhaps you'd end up as the equivalent of a well looked after and groomed horse. Technically, you're someone's food, but in this case you've lucked out and you're being looked after by someone nice that doesn't want to eat you. On the other end of the spectrum, you could be the equivalent of a male chicken, liquidated immediately after birth and swiftly turned into chicken nuggets. There are winners and losers with all the jobs I've discussed today, but the range is perhaps the greatest here. After all, no one wants to be a nugget. What do you think so far, my lords? Have I got this list correct? Would you rather be an astro garbage collector or someone's livestock? But in my opinion, what must be undoubtedly the worst possible job across the galaxy is number 1, the experimental test subject. The experimental test subject job is available to authoritarian or xenophobic empires that run the experimental sentencing civic. Judicial processing and a thirst for knowledge share a single solution in this society. Working in secrecy, researchers conduct extremely harsh experiments on test subjects drawn from the criminal underworld. The occasional fatality is merely the cost of progress. Rather than letting a criminal rot in a cell, this state has decided that they could repay society, literally. Science is always looking for test subjects after all, and criminals, it appears, have given up the right to say no. In this system, a life sentence is literal. This society will keep you alive using experimental life support long after your body has given up, just to see how much radiation your liver can actually take before it turns into sludge. The occasional fatality, that's simply a data point. Now, we are told that subjects are only drawn from the criminal underworld, but the question has to be, what happens when the Empire runs out of criminals? Well, they go out and find more, of course, and often, given that these empires are xenophobic, these new test subjects are aliens, of course. The galaxy is large and full of life, meaning that there are many test subjects just waiting to be found. Truly, I cannot think of a worse job in the galaxy.